con esta segunda sesión de Señales, esta serie de conferencias que tendremos desde la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño en la Universidad de los Andes para discutir cuál será el futuro de la educación en arquitectura, en diseño y especular un poco sobre cuál será el rol de estas disciplinas en estos como futuros inciertos. Hoy tendremos a Santiago de Francisco, que va a presentar a nuestra invitada especial, Mafalda Casais. Y les quiero recordar solamente que a lo largo de toda la charla pueden irnos enviando las preguntas que tengan para Mafalda por el chat, en Facebook por el chat. Vamos a estar pendientes y los que están conectados acá directamente en Webex también. Iremos tomando notas y al final haremos todas las preguntas que tengan para ella. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being so patient, for all of you who were very early on here on live with us. We are going to start right now with our second session of Señales, the series of virtual conferences that we're going to have to discuss or speculate about the future of teaching design and architecture, or what these, what will the role of design and architecture be in this uncertain future. We're going to have our faculty teacher, Santiago de Francisco, introduce our keynote speaker for today, Mafalda Casais. And during the entire conference, if anybody has any questions, you can just write them on the chat, either on Facebook Live or on WebEx, and we will be seeing all of your questions, and we'll make the questions. We'll ask Mafalda at the end of the conference all of the questions that you guys have. So without further ado, Santiago, welcome, and you can have your virtual stage now.
Gracias, Valentina. Thank you. Bienvenidos a Señales. Hoy tengo el honor de presentar a nuestra siguiente invitada. Y su trabajo se ha enfocado generalmente en entender la importancia del significado de los objetos y los productos para promover bienestar. So, hello everybody. Today I have the honor to present our next guest. She's a PhD candidate from the Delphi Institute of Positive Design at Delphi University of Technology. Her work is about understanding the importance of meaning in objects and products to foster well-being. Ella ha escrito una serie de artículos alrededor del tema y ha desarrollado una serie de herramientas, un set de herramientas para inspirar estudiantes y diseñadores a diseñar para la felicidad, enfocándose precisamente en el significado simbólico, cómo construir el significado simbólico en objetos. Esta herramienta se llama SIM. So, she's written a couple of articles and journal papers about this topic, and also has developed this toolkit. It's called SIM, which aims to inspire designers and design students to design for happiness, focusing on personal symbolic meaning to foster this well-being. Yo también he tenido la oportunidad de colaborar con ella. De hecho, ella fue la mentora de mi proyecto de grado de maestría en Delft, y luego tuvimos la posibilidad de escribir un artículo juntos donde hablábamos un poquito de lo que había sido la experiencia de su proyecto de grado. I also had the fortune to collaborate with her during my master's project graduation. She was my mentor. And later on, we wrote an article called Big Cash, the Digital Piggy Bank for Meaningful Saving Behavior on the topic. So, en octubre, ella va a estar defendiendo su proyecto de doctorado. Y mientras eso se ha embarcado en otra serie de proyectos, como por ejemplo, explorar herramientas de diseño en busca o que se enfocan en temas de educación para promover el bienestar subjetivo y todos estos temas relacionados con el Instituto Positivo de Delft. So in October, she will be defending her thesis. She embarked in a new project exploring design tools in education context to promote well-being. So I give the screen, le doy la palabra y la pantalla en este momento a Mafalda Casais.
Thank you, Santiago. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen first. Can you see it well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So, buenos dias. I'm going to be speaking in English because my Spanish is really poor. But if you do have questions in Spanish, you are free to add them to the chat because I am able to understand a little bit. So today I'll be sharing with research. I'll be telling you how I have dealt with understanding and teaching a challenging subject, which has to do with humanizing design, and also how I have involved students throughout my research project. So I like to begin presentations with a strong image. And this one is from a designer called Derek Casey, who created this project in which he would photograph people with their special possessions. It's a really interesting thought experiment to think what possessions would we bring to such a display. It's really interesting to see how much of a person, of their personality, of their life, we can see from their special possessions that have been collected throughout an entire lifetime. And you can already get a sense of what my research is about. Can you imagine what your wall would look like and what objects you consider most relevant and representative of yourself? So my background is in design. I started doing a 3-year illustration course, and then I did 1 year of graphic design. I then switched to a more broad undergraduate course at the University of Lisbon, where I also did a master's in product design. Currently, as Santiago said already, I'm finishing my PhD in positive design at the Delft Institute of Positive Design at the Delft University of Technology. So my work focuses on design for well-being, positive design, and positive design is designed with the intention of improving the lives of people and society without necessarily focusing on problems. Happiness is determined by our genes in about 50%. So that's something we cannot really change. And then only 10% of what determines happiness, and coincidentally is also where people invest the most, is the circumstances of our lives. So for example, if we're beautiful, if we have a job, if we're single, etc. And then finally, 40% corresponds to the intentional activities that we do. And here is where design can have a very relevant role. And intentional activities and experiences are things like practicing gratitude, being virtuous, enjoying nature, spending time with friends, etc. And design can play several roles in supporting these. Desmet and Pohlmeier proposed a positive design framework to explain what the optimal combination of ingredients is. Design for virtue, design for pleasure, and design for personal significance, when combined in various amounts, generate an intervention that is directed towards human flourishing. For example, design for virtue can be an easy-to-use and simple thermostat that helps you become more environmentally conscious, and therefore a more morally better person. Design for pleasure can be a beautiful boat that enables you to sail with your friends and family, and that gives you pleasure. And design for personal significance can be, for example, a bottle that counts the amount of plastic bottles you save, which helps you keep to your goals of drinking more water and saving the planet, therefore supporting what is personally worthwhile to you. So this combination is what makes positive design. So how can we design for well-being? Pohlmeier proposed the design well-being matrix, in which she describes different ways that design can contribute to people's well-being. This model crosses elements of goals. In the x-axis, we find 5 determinants of well-being proposed by Martin Seligman. The PERMA model, which stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And in the y-axis, we have the roles design can play to realize these determinants. So design can be a direct source of well-being, for example, a beautiful product that is aesthetically pleasing. Design can enable well-being directly, for example, by being part of an engaging activity. Design can indirectly support well-being, for example, providing cues for actions or thoughts. And design can be a symbol for well-being, for example, by symbolizing an important life event. And my research focused exactly on that, on how products can symbolize relevant things in life, because this didn't have a lot of exploration and operationalization into methods and tools for designers to use. So my research question was, what is well-being related symbolic meaning, and how can we apply it to design? And that generated 3 research goals. First, to understand the phenomenon of well-being related symbolic meaning in products. Second, to develop design directions using that knowledge. And third, to apply this knowledge in practice and gain feedback. So in sum, I wanted to understand, to translate that understanding for designers, and to communicate it to designers and to the general public. So we begin by looking at how I studied and defined well-being related symbolic meaning in household products. Meaning in products is very complex. We can still generally say that products have essentially 2 types of meaning. There's something that is inherent to the object, that is objectively measured, like the size, the color, the features. And then there's something symbolic, which only exists due to the assignment of meaning by people with their own cultural and personal filters and subjectivity. Here's a real example, a teapot. It has a utilitarian meaning that relates to how it functions, the task it performs, and the affordances it allows. It has shared meanings related to culture, advertisement, and social constructs that we collectively assign. In the case of the teapot, English teapots are from Turkish teapots, for example, and how these 2 are different from Taiwanese bubble tea. The teapot's features also relate to a semantic interpretation of the shapes, color, or style, like saying the teapot is elegant or classic or modern. And then there's the personal meaning, which is linked to people's experiences, memories, associations, and can also be linked to well-being. So well-being related symbolic meanings are those representations that support or signify the product owner's well-being. In the home, people curate their accumulated possessions. They care for, they share, they store, they appropriate them. It's through these processes of repeated interaction that people construct their identities and give meaning to their lives. And it's also in the home, with its contents and its related processes, that are revealing of people's life journey. To study the role of symbolic meaning in products that support people's well-being, I looked at this intimate environment. It offers a unique perspective into product-person relationships. So I found that products can symbolize the 6 well-being determinants proposed by Carol Riff. Purpose in life, which has to do with having a sense of directedness from personal beliefs and goals. Environmental, which has to do with being able to choose, adapt, or create a suitable environment for personal needs and values. Autonomy, which has to do with being self-determined and authentic in thoughts and in actions, living according to one's own standards, and being able to resist social pressures. Self-acceptance, which has to do with being compassionate and accepting of oneself. Positive relationships with others, which has to do with being in engaging, affectionate, reciprocal relationships with other people. And personal growth, which has to do with being open to new experiences and having a sense of continued personal development. To give you some examples, products that symbolize purpose in life, they are tangible representations of important aspects that make life worthwhile. it supports a sense of directedness. And this example is of a parent ring that the owner got when he became a father and represents his motivation and purpose to be better for his son. Products that symbolize environmental mastery are related to skill development and the creation of relevant networks. They also enable certain skills or competences and facilitate the construction of beneficial networks and partnerships, or symbolize personally significant values and concerns. Meaning support a sense of adequacy and of personal and social thriving. This example is of a pair of shoes that gives the owner confidence and also has a service to repair and mend, which aligns with his personal values. Products that symbolize autonomy are enablers of an independent and successful life. They support physical autonomy and independence, or they allow and represent the expression of authenticity. Products with this symbolic meaning support also a sense of self-determination and self-reliance in thinking and in acting. This example is of a blood device, monitoring device, that freed the owner from having to go to the clinic all the time, gave her the chance to go travel, go sailing, and this made it become very relevant for her. Products that symbolize self-acceptance are meaningful because they allow self-expression of personal identity, and they show a person's creativity. They help in the construction and the communication of one's identity, and they trigger self-reflection, whereby one sees oneself as a whole, composed of good and bad parts. Products with this symbolic meaning support a sense of self-awareness and self-compassion. This is an example of a plush toy that helped the owner go through some difficult times and eventually inspired her creativity because she used the rabbit as a character in her stories. Products can symbolize positive relationships with others that are meaningful because they were given as a gift by a loved one or inherited by a family member, or they play a role in marking an important moment in a relationship. Products with this symbolic meaning support a sense of belongingness. This is an example of an owl that used to sit in a grandfather's home office where he told fairy tale stories to his grandchildren. Today, one of the grandchildren has the owl to remind him of these precious moments and of the relationship he had with his grandfather. And finally, products can symbolize personal growth. They are focused on reflective and prospective practices that overlook life as a whole. For example, marking a transition moment or evoking experiences and lessons learned, or enabling the engagement in new opportunities and challenges. This is an example of a military name tag that was kept because it represents personal development for the owner, having gone through a difficult time and overcoming it. So in sum, we found 6 well-being related symbolic meanings and possessions people keep in their homes. And those products symbolize people's psychological well-being. Products with this type of symbolic meaning play an important part in making people happy. Ideally, a person is mentally strong, has her own ideas, and knows who she is. That means she has psychological well-being. This affects how she acts towards others, forms new relationships and networks, cultivates existing ones, and builds her life through meaningful experiences and actions, taking lessons from the bad moments and growing from them. She finds pleasure and meaning in her life, and in the interactions therein. And here is where symbolic products can have an important role. This in turn affects how she evaluates her life as a whole, as being positive, happy, and meaningful. So having subjective well-being. Some conclusions that I have come to is that design with symbolic meaning and teaching about symbolic meaning is very difficult because meaning it exists only because of people. It's generated in interactions and it's person and context dependent. That makes it difficult to design for a certain symbolic meaning. So let me finish this part by asking, can you identify these symbolic meanings in your possessions? Have you ever considered these symbolic meanings in your design projects? After identifying the 6 symbolic meanings in products, the second part of the project consisted on translating these into design directions that designers could use. because giving just a list of the 6 symbolic meanings was not enough. So this is the part of the project when I began to involve a lot of design students. To find design directions linked to the 6 symbolic meanings, I collected 50 product examples that could symbolize or enable one or more of the identified symbolic meanings. Then I asked designers and design students to join me in a session to discuss the possible strategies behind each product. And this resulted in 16 design directions that could support the development of an intervention or product that could support well-being. These are the resulting 16 design directions. They vary a bit and then could be used. Examples, for example, are for positive relations with others, the design direction embody characteristics of a group. For personal growth, the design direction enhance memories. Or for purpose in life, the design direction keep track of progress. Or for example, for self-acceptance, the design direction allows self-expression. I'm going to give you 2 examples in a bit more depth. The design direction designed for mindfulness, for the symbolic meaning of autonomy, can be applied by slowing down processes or disclosing mechanisms behind products to promote mindful living. An example of a product that was designed for mindful use by disclosing its mechanisms is the standard lamp by designers Kalen Knauf and Conrad Brown. The lamp does not have an on or off switch, so the person using it has to choose between 2 types of fixtures and place it in a copper tower to complete an electric circuit. In this product, the person's agency and autonomy are evidenced because the processes that make the lamp function are not automatic, so the person has to perform them intentionally. The result is that a person builds a thoughtful relationship with the product, actively making decisions that usually would not be necessary, and this fosters mindfulness and attuned living. This relates to autonomy because it contributes to a sense of self-reliance by the user by enabling them to understand the process and intervene in any part of it. Another example is the design direction support multisensorial communication for the symbolic meaning of environmental mastery. It can be put in practice by translating messages into a sensorial experience. An illustrative example of a product that supports this design direction is the Elfoid P1 by Hiroshi Ishiguro Laboratory. This hybrid cell phone robot concept is a simplified human figure that transmits voice and motion to convey human presence. Supporting multisensorial ways of communicating represents an opportunity to enrich the message and the experience of receiving it by rendering it closer to a direct interaction and incorporating audio or kinesthetic elements as a metaphor for intimate human behaviors. So finally, the last step in the project was to communicate the design directions and the symbolic meanings to designers, and in a way to also communicate it to the general public. So I developed a card set that included the 16 design directions and the 6 symbolic meanings in order to present designers with all this information in an accessible way. The SIM toolkit was developed including 4 introduction cards, which explain what positive design is and what the toolkit offers, 6 symbolic meaning cards explaining each symbolic meaning, and the 16 design direction cards with some questions in the back to help designers go deeper into the design directions. It also has a guideline sheet, which shows a map of the toolkit and gives suggestions on how to use it. And it has a website that describes the research, shows product examples for each symbolic meaning, and gives more information about the design directions and the symbolic meanings. The initial card set was developed with a student, Liane. I also conducted some tests with other students about the information in the cards to make it optimal for using in the design process. For example, she found that including product examples in the cards had a fixation effect, and so that was something that I changed to improve it. Then I did a study with design students and designers to see how the card set worked, what problems or opportunities they identified, and they suggested to add the website to have the product examples there and more information. So this is the guideline sheet that has the mapping of the toolkit and the suggestions of use. And once the toolkit was developed, I used it in several workshops with design researchers, designers from industry, and design students to see how it actually worked in practice. And I found out it was inspiring, generative, and could be combined with other methods. I would like to show you an example of a product. It was designed using the toolkit, and it's from a colleague at Universidad de los Andes. It's called Con mi Esencia by Maria Alejandra Garcia Ferro. And it's a piece of jewelry with a mechanism that allows people to count the number of times they require to gain control and balance during their day. Every time a person loses control of their day, they can represent that moment by moving a ball. At the end of the day, the person can have a final count that allows them to reflect on what happened during the day. So this is strongly connected with the meaning of purpose in life, especially with the two design directions of providing a sense of control and keeping track of progress. The designer mentioned that the success of the piece lies in two aspects. The first is that it provides a reflection for the user to understand that it's not a bad situation when they have a chance to take back control, and even more to prevent future situations or future movements of the piece in result of difficult situations. And the second aspect lies in the user being able to reflect at the end of the day on what happened, and also on which areas they can work on in order to keep from losing control. Thus, it creates an activity of consciousness. So another way that I did the communication of the research project was through a film. From the first study I did with people's special possessions, I did a videography and I showed it in an academic film festival in Berlin, and it reached a completely different audience. I wanted to show you the trailer, but with the Facebook Live, it's not possible, so maybe I'll do it at the end of everything, at the end of this talk. And currently, I'm doing something else. I'm still working with design tools, but more from the perspective of teaching rather than designing. And I developed some arguments as to why design tools like canvases or card sets or posters or games, etc., might be valuable, for example, to teach difficult concepts, which I already experienced when I developed the Sim Toolkit. It conveyed a difficult topic in an accessible way. So my arguments are that designers think visually, that creating mental images supports learning, that tools synthesize complex knowledge, and that synthesis makes knowledge more actionable, and that the physical format makes people interact differently. But there's also a potential problem with using tools in education, is that there is a possibility of fixation on the tool, which means that students think they need the tool to go on through a certain process. So that's something that teachers, when using tools, must be aware of. In a study, I analyzed design tools and compared them with the source of with their source of information, which is often books or academic papers. And I developed this model to support my arguments that design tools offer information in a more accessible way to all levels of higher education, versus design papers, which are dense and complex, but do offer the advantage of design in a clear way, and versus the original source of theory, which is often outside of design and therefore uses specific languages and terms that make comprehension more difficult. So in sum, for design students, it's difficult to read and take information from literature from other fields. It gets easier with literature from the design field, and it's even more accessible to convey that information with the help of design tools. So now I had a couple of questions. I don't know how we're going to do this because I would love to hear the input of the audience. Some questions about the future of design education. Well, first of all, I would like to know if you have been a part of a research project as a student, and if you believe that learning by doing complements education. In my personal experience, it works incredibly well. So the students are not only made more responsible for a part of someone else's project by doing, so they are actually contributing with a significant part of the process. And my second question is whether you have used tools of any kind in class, and what goes well and what doesn't. I'm really interested in knowing that. I know I have already mentioned that sometimes there is a problem of fixation, but what else goes wrong and what else goes well? Because it's, according to my thinking and my arguments, it is a positive way to introduce a complex topic in class. Then another question is, what other changes will there be in design education? For example, digitized and virtual environments, especially AI, what will that look like? A very for this COVID moment we're going through is whether online learning is better for design education, and if it's even possible. Is it possible to do design education online? And lastly, if modular education or on-demand learning is a better model than what we currently have, so collecting skills versus collecting degrees. I would love to hear your input. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm very willing to receive questions also in my email. If you are interested after the talk, we can continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mafalda, for this wonderful lecture. I think it's very inspiring, and I would also love to see what people have to say or ask. But for instance, in my personal experience using design tools, I think at some point you have to let them go. You know, like for me, the tool is a nice trigger for engaging in conversations that sometimes is difficult just by talking, you know. But then, as you mentioned, you cannot fixate on the tool, because otherwise you will be embedding a lot of the responsibility to the tool and not to the designer.
Yeah.
So I think there's no like a exact balance that you could have in order to say like you only use the tool for a certain % of the process. It is very intuitive. I mean, you have to really figure out where you need to move on to the next stage, because usually these tools are meant for the ideation process.
Yeah. Yes.
And then when you have to implement it, you need a different kind of skills. And I think that bridge, that process is something that it's personal also. Like I think every designer or every student has to figure out how to go through that process of transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, I have experienced it myself as well.
Yeah, and I think that's also very interesting in terms of I don't know if you can share your screen to see the questions, or maybe we
of course.
copy them in the chat. But I think I was just thinking about what I was telling you, and then figuring out that this process is a transition. I think we are also living a transition with this COVID situation, and I think the whole education system has to figure out a way of going through this transformation. So I don't know how like if you have thought about that with the tools that you have been studying or the tools that you have been researching.
No, I have not started. I have started to think about it, but very abstract, in a very abstract way still. It has been a sudden change, and all of a sudden we are not able to have, for example, studio environment. We're not able to do a lot of things in class as we used to. So it's interesting to reflect on these changes especially when the situation calms down and we're able to look back and see what worked and what didn't. So I haven't really studied it per se, but I have started to reflect on it.
Great. We have one question from the audience. They say, thank you so much. I would like to know more detailedly how to use that theme toolkit.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to here, this this slide right here, because it shows exactly what the toolkit is about, what the toolkit is. It has 4 introduction cards, and the introduction cards are a starting point, an entry point into the toolkit. The introduction cards a bit about what positive design is and what design for symbolic meaning is, and they present the website as well. The 6 symbolic meaning cards, they describe each symbolic meaning. They have a small definition of each symbolic meaning, and on the back side they have the proposed design directions listed for each symbolic meaning, and that links to the cards, which have each of them, they're color coded. Each of them has a design direction in the front, and on the back side they have questions. So all those link to the website, of course. And the way I propose using it is, for example, as a icebreaker, using the 6 symbolic meaning cards. People can, in a group, share what their own symbolic possessions are with those symbolic meanings. That really helps to understand these concepts, these symbolic meanings, and to immediately create a sharing environment. So it kind of breaks the ice to start with these concepts. And there are different ways to use it. The idea behind the toolkit is that it's very open. So you can combine several design directions to create an idea for something, to create a design vision, or to evaluate a product. So for instance, if you have, let's say, a lamp or a chair, something very, very classic, very basic, and you want it to have something more relevant, more meaningful in it, you can use one of the design directions and imagine it says embody characteristics of a group. It's something you can do, or design something that is purposefully incomplete so that the user can have input at aesthetic and performance level. That immediately creates a level of symbolic meaning in the product. So that is the purpose of the Sim Toolkit. I invite you to go to www.designwithmeaning.org to visit the website and find out a little bit more about what the toolkit is and how it looks. You can download a free version. So yeah.
And actually for the design students, I would like to say that we're going to use the same set of cards in the design and emotion course that I give, and probably we will be inviting Mafalda to give us some input and feedback on the process. So also if you are listening or seeing this presentation and you are enrolled in my course, you're gonna be able to experience the use of this toolkit. So it's gonna be really cool.
Yeah, I look forward to.
That's good. We have one answer and one question on Facebook. So I guess the first one is an answer to one of your questions, Mafalda. This is from Nathalie Sepulveda. She says, about the second question, I'm a bachelor in design and my master was in business school. What I found with the other business students was that for them, the tools were not useful when they didn't understand the designer mindset. They were totally fixated on the tools, and if the outcome wasn't what they expected, the responsibility was on the tool.
Okay. That is interesting. I have also used design tools in non-design students. So in this case, I used it on psychology students. And I must say that I have suffered a great resistance initially also, because they didn't understand the tools, because they didn't have the designer mindset indeed. So it took a little bit of trial and error to understand the tool, but once it was understood, it yielded really nice results. So it's also it's a little bit on both parts. So conveying the tool as a teacher has to be done in a certain way. You have to really explain well what tool is about, and also the tool needs to be designed with a specific target in mind. So if you want the design tool to be just for designers, then it's going to be limited. And if you want the design tool to be for example, a tool about empathizing with users can be used by many fields. And if the tool is created in a certain way that other fields can understand, other languages, other mindsets, then it's also about the way the tool is built. So yeah, I have experienced that. I can completely relate. Yeah.
Yeah, her follow-up question was exactly what you just answered. So she said, what's your opinion about professionals in other fields using design tools? So I think that was covered.
Yeah, well, I think it's really, really nice when design thinking and design tools are spread out throughout two fields. But then again, it has to be very specific, very well designed, either broad enough for them to integrate their own language, their own mindset into it, or very specific that something just requires a specific answer or a specific process. It has to be done well, but it has really nice results when it's done well.
And we have one, I guess, final question here on WebEx from Diana Gomez. She asks, do you think is it possible to apply this design tool within a larger enterprise in order to produce massive products designed with meaning?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about, for example, creating products that are purposefully incomplete, that can be a chair, but can also be a cell phone. That can be. This is a type of strategy that will result in some level of symbolic meaning if the user has to be part of the input and aesthetic and performance level of the product. It's just an example, right? So I have seen this tool being used at a company level to create visions for a certain project. So even more broad than a product. And it has absolutely possibility for mass production. There's no reason why it should be confined to a sort of designer product. Yeah.
Okay. If we have any more questions from the audience, I would like to thank Mafalda for sharing with us all this inspiring information.
Thank you so much for having me.
Would be open for this. I think it would
Thank you.
Thank you, Santiago, and thank you, Mafalda, for this awesome second session of Señales. Thank you for your generous time. We are done. I will just like to invite anybody that wants to our next session of Señales, which will be on August 27th. We will have Andrés Jaque, and we will be speaking about all of these speculations more on the side of architecture. So on our social network, on our Facebook, our Instagram, or Twitter, we'll have all the information to this next event. So thank you to everybody that was here, and thank you especially to Mafalda for your time.
Thank you.
Y para los demás, solo era recordarles, muchas gracias por estar acá y por acompañarnos en esta segunda sesión de Señales. Los invitamos muy especialmente a la siguiente conferencia que tenemos en agosto 27, que tendremos con Andrés Jaque. Para la tercera sesión estaremos hablando un poquito más de estos mismos temas, un poquito desde el lado de la arquitectura. Entonces, muchas gracias a todos y que tengan un gran día. Goodbye.